So, in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which is one of several key Gospels that were imperative to the early Christ movement.
Hey everybody, I've been tagged a number of times in this video, so I'll share some thoughts in response to this creator whose rhetorical goals I do appreciate and support, but right off the bat we've got some issues. There are no data that support the assertion that the Gospel of Mary was a key gospel or that it was imperative to the early Christ movement, because if we had not found a handful of manuscripts that fragmentarily preserved the Gospel of Mary in recent years, we would have absolutely no idea of its existence. It is never mentioned by anyone in the early church. We have no record of anyone mentioning it anywhere. So we simply have no data to determine whether or not it was considered important at all.
But were strategically left out of biblical canon as we know it.
So in addition to the fact that we have no data that indicate the Gospel of Mary was ever part of the discussion when it came to the biblical canon, we can confidently conclude it would not have been part of the discussion because it would have been labeled a Gnostic text. And Gnostic texts were absolutely not a part of the discussion because they had been rejected as a part of Proto-Orthodoxy's rejection of Gnosticism in the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE through the application of the developing canon of faith that preceded the development of a biblical canon in the 4th century CE. Now, some scholars reject the labeling of the Gospel of Mary as Gnostic, but there are two main reasons for that. One is that scholars are recognizing it's not easy to define or delineate the concept of Gnosticism, but you can't really effectively define or delineate conceptual categories to begin with, as I have discussed many times on my channel. The other concern is that it lacks any reference to the demiurge or the traditional Gnostic cosmogony. But in addition to the fact that we are missing most of the Gospel of Mary, we don't have to have a reference to that cosmogony in order to have a Gnostic text, or in order for early Christians to have rejected it as a Gnostic text. One of Gnosticism's central ideologies, and it's represented in a variety of different ways, but is the application of this Middle Platonic notion that humans have this immaterial, divine, pre-existing soul that right now is trapped in a material body that was created by this corrupt, lower, ignorant demiurge. And salvation is about escaping this lower prison of the flesh and returning to commune with the divine pleroma or fullness. That is thoroughly Gnostic, and that is one of the primary ideological aims of the Gospel of Mary. So when the biblical canon was developing, the Gospel of Mary, as with other Gnostic literature, had long been rejected and just was not a part of the discussion.
Jesus is quoted as saying, there is no such thing as sin. He goes on to say that there's no such thing as sin, at least not in the way that you are thinking of it. That sin is what happens when we act out of alignment with our truth, with the truth of who we are, with our ultimate true nature, which is love.
So this statement is clearly based on Gospel of Mary's chapter 7, lines 10 through 16, but it's giving it kind of a new agey spin. There's no reference anywhere to love as our true nature. The only references to love are in the repeated statements that Jesus loved Mary more than anyone else. What there is a reference to is sin being the inappropriate entanglement of our pre-existent divine soul, which is a part of the divine fullness, the pleroma, becoming entangled with this corrupt material world. So this is the Gnostic idea, borrowing from Middle Platonism, this notion that we have fallen from the divine pleroma thanks to the demiurge's development of this corrupt and stupid material world, and we're trapped in these material prisons until we can learn the knowledge that helps us overcome and escape the prisons of our bodies. So here's what the text actually says in the Gospel of Mary. Peter said to him, "Since you have explained everything to us, tell us this too. What is the sin of the world?" The Savior said, "There is no sin, but it is you who perform sin when you do what is like the nature of adultery, which is called sin." So it's a little cryptic, but the idea is basically Jesus is rejecting the notion that what the world acknowledges as sin is at all relevant to those who have this higher knowledge, because the material world is all going to dissolve and fall away anyway. But when we entangle ourselves with the concerns of the material world, then we are uniting what ought not to be united, and thus the comparison with adultery, and thus we are engaging in what can be called sin.
The Gospel of Mary also talks about how our humanity is holy and how we are here to become children of true humanity, meaning fully human and fully divine.
So this is a reference to the Gnostic notion that our real true selves are those immaterial divine souls that are within our material bodies seeking to overcome and escape from it. So we need to set aside the cares of the material world so that we can escape to return to the divine pleroma from which Jesus also comes. And as the Son of Man, Jesus is the perfect model of how to live in accordance with that knowledge. And so he is within us in the sense that that same divine spark is within us, and we must look within and use Jesus's modeling to understand how to live so that we can overcome and escape the material world.
And that there is no real hierarchy in the spiritual realm.
And this rejection of institutions and of hierarchies is one of the central ideologies of Gnosticism, which is why it rejected the institution of the church, rejected things like scriptural canons and things like that, but was just concerned with promoting what it understood to be true ideologies about our nature.
This also carries over to the Gospel of Thomas, which is another one of the Gospels that were critical to the early Christ movement, but were left out of biblical canon.
So the Gospel of Philip is another Gnostic gospel. Most scholars would date its composition to around the 3rd century CE, so it's a little later than many of the other Gnostic gospels. And as with the Gospel of Mary, there's no indication that it had any particular place of prominence or importance in early Christianity.
That describes Mary Magdalene and Jesus as kenonos, or soul partners. Basically, you couldn't have Jesus without Mary Magdalene, and her role was more important than the church wants you to realize.
So I absolutely agree here that Mary Magdalene's role within the early Christian movement has largely been obscured and even erased, as well as the roles of many other women who were leaders in the early church, thanks to the conflation of the institution of the church and the organs of state and the resulting move towards a more unilateral patriarchy.